Hello. I am also glad that Paul mentioned leapfrogging, because I literally am going to talk about leapfrogging. When I look at this organism, I see amazing technologies. I also see something called selection pressure. All the technologies that you see in the natural world are there because of a certain set of pressures from the environment. When we set aspirational goals and we head for zero and beyond, that's a selection pressure, and innovation will follow. And we're finally getting to the kinds of selection pressure these organisms have been under for 3.8 billion years. As a biologist, I know that a sustainable world exists and that it's been in the making for a long, long time. And this discipline, this design discipline I'm going to tell you about, biomimicry, is a way of looking to these organisms for inspiration about solving our own human problems. Here's one that is in my backyard. This is the sandhill crane. The other thing I'm seeing happen in sustainability, besides having aspirational goals suddenly that have enormous selection pressure, we're also at a point in which we're starting to look for ideas where we haven't looked before. Organisms are incredibly opportunistic. The sandhill crane will fly for miles and miles and miles without fossil fuels, obviously, but also without a beat, without taking a wing beat. What they do is they go from thermal to thermal. Thermal is a rising column of hot air. And they will find it. They've got the senses to be able to see a thermal, even though it's invisible, to sense it. And they'll find that thermal, they'll ride up about half a mile up above the ground, and they'll take that thermal up, and then they'll go at a diagonal, they'll glide for long, long distances until they go to the bottom of the next thermal. They literally go thermal by thermal by thermal, and that's how they fly. They can see opportunity. And what I'm going to show you is that by looking to these organisms, we begin to see opportunities where we didn't know they existed. So it's learning from and then emulating forms, processes like chemistry, ecosystem level ideas. These are some of the companies that are working in biomimicry, meaning they are inviting. I have a company of biologists. They invite us to the design table. We tell them how organisms manage to do what they do. And what connects us is function. They tell us the kind of function they're trying to achieve in whatever invention they're trying to create, and we tell them how nature has already done that. Sometimes it's very, very simple, elegant but simple. This is a group of students, actually, at Caltech came up with this one. And they studied how fish school. And in a school, fish are actually surfing the vortexes, the water vortexes that are created by the sinuous movements of the fish ahead of them. So that's how fish are able to swim upstream with very little muscle power. Because the fish in front of them throws off a vortex, and they shape their bodies to that vortex, the one behind it, and then they sort of sling themselves upstream. So they said, well, what if we take wind turbines, vertical axis wind turbines, and instead of separating them the way we do now and taking up large amounts of land to have a wind farm, what if we put them close together? What if the vortex created by one wind turbine will actually start to spin the turbine behind it? And in fact, when they put the turbines in a field as if it's in a school of fish, they get about 10 times more wind power. So in this case, it's seeing opportunities where we don't see them. What we now think of as turbulence, fish see as opportunity. Here's another one. This is Qualcomm. if you turn over your cell phone, you'll see the word Qualcomm. It's a company that makes a lot of telecommunication devices. And they also are now making screens for readers, for like iPad-like readers. It's not in the iPad yet, but it's a new screen called Mirasol. It's based on how butterflies create color. And they don't create it with backlighting, and they don't create it with pigments. They actually create it with layers, transparent layers. Light bounces through those layers, creating the color to your eye. It bounces, and then it refracts and bounces back to create the color blue. A different set of layers create the color yellow, a different set of layers create the color black. So Mirasol is basically a display screen where each pixel is a sandwich of two layers that separate or get closer together. The ambient light, or sunlight, creates the color to your eye, so no backlighting is needed. There's another one. Ramon was up here before at Interface, and he was talking about tactiles. And what tactiles are a way to put those carpet tiles together without glue. Actually, it's a little, I don't know if you can see it, it's a little sort of transparent coaster type of thing. And it's got adhesive on both sides. And you put that in the corners of 4 of the carpet tiles. And then the carpet tiles actually are all held together. And this came out of a workshop in which we said, okay, they wanted to get away from glue. It was one of the environmental problems, was putting glue down underneath these carpet tiles. You couldn't pull it up as easily to remove the carpet tile and send it back to the manufacturer. There was volatile compounds coming from the glue. And so at a workshop in which we said, how does nature adhere? We realized that things like geckos use gravity actually to hold themselves down. They don't use glue. They actually use these fine bristles at the base of their toes that adhere with intermolecular forces to the ground, and then it's reversible. But it's gravity that actually allows the effect to work. And we also talked about the fact that bird feathers, when a bird ruffles its feathers and it gets, the feathers get separated, and then they're able to put those feathers back together with their beak. The reason is because at the edge of each feather, there are hooks and barbules. It's like a self-healing zipper. So we said, what if we put all the carpet tiles together? Because if you put all the carpet tiles together, suddenly you have a broadloom carpet, and gravity holds it down instead of glue. Reduce their environmental footprint by 95% for that product. Sometimes it's just sort of brilliant thinking. Here's another one. This is a UK company called Novo Laboratories. And they said, everybody was talking about, let's put solar refrigerators in villages because 50% of people who are supposed to get vaccines never get them because of a break in the cold chain. So how do we get refrigerators into the village? And instead, he said, well, how does nature preserve? And he looked at organisms like the resurrection fern, and this is called a tardigrade, a little tiny microscopic organism that dries out almost completely, and then without hurting its cells. And he looked at that and he said, this is nature's best way to preserve. And he was able to make a vaccine storage device that needs no refrigeration. And now Biomatrica in San Diego has done the same thing, mimicking this sugar that's sort of like a tiny time capsule technology around vaccines or around DNA or around blood or proteins, what they call biologicals. They're shrink wrapping these. They need no refrigeration. So now you can think about every hospital or every university being able to unplug their freezers. That's a huge savings, fossil fuel savings and life saving as well. So sometimes the smallest organisms. So it's about thinking differently. It's about seeing opportunity where you once saw only lack, or in this case, only poison. CO2 is the poison of our era. There's too much of it. But organisms love CO2. Plants love CO2. That's what wood is. It's air, CO2. Coral reefs, CO2. All the seashells made of CO2 plus calcium and carbonate. So now people are saying, instead of talking about sequestering CO2 and burying it underground, why don't we make a whole new materials economy based on CO2? That's how an organism would think. So some of the first companies, there's a company called Calera in California. They're taking CO2 and seawater, CO2 coming out of smokestacks, and seawater, and out precipitates calcium carbonate aggregate that actually replaces Portland cement. Cement is 6 to 8% of all CO2 emissions. So this is making a building material out of CO2. This is making biodegradable plastics out of CO2. Unilever has just invested in this company called Novomer, looking at plants and how they take CO2 and make long-chain polymers, sugars, and starches. Instead of making sugars and starches, they're making biodegradable polymers, polycarbonate, the stuff that's in your sunglasses and your CDs. CO2 as a feedstock. Imagine getting CO2 sequestration credits for your packaging. This is 50% by weight CO2. So of course, organisms are, the reason I wrote biomimicry was I read this tiny snippet that said our solar cells don't work like leaves. And it made me crazy to think that we hadn't looked at leaves to come up with solar cells. And in fact, most of our solar cells don't work like leaves. New ones called dye-sensitized solar cells do, meaning they actually use dyes. And they're very, very thin film solar cells. So that's starting to happen. But what leaves really do is something we're not doing yet. Leaves don't really, have a wire coming out of them. Instead, they take the sun's energy, they use that energy to split water. And then they use CO2, and they use the hydrogen protons that come out of that water, and they make chemistry out of it. It's photons to fuel. That chemistry then is something they can break down. They make stuff. So the new holy grail it's called artificial photosynthesis. And the new holy grail is that we use solar energy, and we do what a leaf does. We grab that, and then we split water with it. We bubble off hydrogen gas, hydrogen protons combined into hydrogen gas, as a way of storing either in fuel cells, or we take that hydrogen gas, add it to CO2, and make fuels like methanol. This would be stored solar energy in a fuel. And there's so many people working on this. I have a ... at the end. It's at this point, most of it is at the lab stage. Sun Catalytics is an MIT company that has just come out, and it's a water splitting company. Stay tuned for this. This is probably the most important development, I think, in this whole slideshow. Sometimes, again, it's easy. We can take what we already have and retrofit it with nature's ideas. This is a humpback whale, and its flipper, it has scalloped edges on its flipper, and that's because it uses that to reduce drag. It's a drag reduction device. When you put those same scalloped edges on the edge of a wind turbine, the turbine can rotate in very low wind speeds. And you can retrofit existing wind turbines with this. It's a company called Whale Power in Canada. 32% less drag, 8% greater lift. Water, enormous amounts of energy to move water, to drill for water, to desalinate water. This is another interesting one. Again, a lot of stuff's going on in Europe in biomimetics, by the way. In fact, the UK is very much a central place for biomimetics. It's called biomimetics here. In Germany, it's called bionics. This is a Danish company called Aquaporin, and its name is the same name as these channels, these hourglass-shaped channels that are in your red blood cells. They're very common. They're water channels, they're water pores. It's very different from how reverse osmosis works. Reverse osmosis, which uses 900 pounds per square inch of pressure to push seawater against a membrane, takes a lot of energy, and the membrane gets clogged. What life does is it pulls, not pushes, it pulls water molecules. It's forward osmosis. It pulls water molecules through this very particularly shaped and chemically charged pore. So aquaporin is making membranes like this now. They're 100 times more permeable than the reverse osmosis membranes. It's forward osmosis instead of reverse. If you see a theme here, you'll see that nature tends to flip everything we've ever thought. Saving energy in transport. This is an interesting one. This is a German group that has created a paint that you paint onto planes and ships with a stencil. And the paint replicates, those are the denticles of a shark. It's the same sort of technology that Michael Phelps was wearing those suits, you know, in the Olympics, the technological doping in the Olympics, because it makes you go very, very fast in the water. It's, again, another drag reduction device. And now there's a paint that you can actually put onto planes, which is really interesting. They figure on if it was applied to the entire fleet of airplanes across the world, that's how much of savings it would be. And shipping, it would be about 2,000 tons of fuel per ship it would save. So these are, you know, these are simple opportunities that we are just now getting around to understanding. Manufacturing, this is the business end of a spider, by the way. It's a really, really close-up of spider silk. 5 times stronger ounce for ounce than steel, and manufactured in a very, very different way than steel. That ceramic and that caribou, there's no kiln involved. There's no kiln involved in a spider. And so it shows us an entirely different way of doing chemistry. We do what's called heat, beat, and treat. That's what material scientists call it. Heating it up, pressure, toxic chemicals. It's the formula. Life cannot afford to do that because it manufactures in its own body. There's all kinds of chemistry going on right now. If you have heard the term self-assembly chemistry, that's what life does. Rather than forcing molecules together, the molecules are shaped in such a way that they jigsaw together and fall to a resting state. It's called self-assembly. It's the way you're made. We're all self-assembled. And chemists are beginning to look at that. I'm working on a solar cell company with Paul Hawken, and it's a self-assembling printed solar cell. This is interesting. Again, I tried to find some European things. There's a company there's a venture capital group called Swedish Biomimicry 3000. And they have something called microlot. It's not U-lot, it's microlot. I couldn't find the symbol. Platform technology. It's a chemistry technology that replicates the way your body makes proteins. We do chemistry in a very different way than how life does chemistry on the surface. It builds things from a surface. And this is a whole new kind of way of making peptides and different kinds of chemistry by having a surface ribbon, if you will. There's a surface, and on that ribbon there's chemical molecules, and they go through a bath and they pick up the next chemical molecule, and then they go through another bath and pick up the third chemical molecule and the fourth. So they assemble it. It's kind of a self-assembly, but in a continuous surface chemistry, very, very different than our beaker chemistry or our vat chemistry. A lot more control, a lot less waste. I'm very interested in watching this one. This is a brand new one. And again, from Europe. Buildings, obviously, huge, huge opportunity to save energy. Actually, the Swiss rebuilding was mimicking the wind flow, mimicked the water flow of a marine sponge, the erotic gherkin. This is a building in Zimbabwe, Harare, Zimbabwe. It has no air conditioning at all in Zimbabwe. And it was modeled after termite mounds, which are self-regulating structures that maintain their temperature within 1 degree Celsius. They maintain a temperature not too cold, not too hot. And they do that through their tunnels and how those tunnels actually play with tidal flows of air. And McPierce and Arup, which is actually the Britain part of Arup, worked on that building in Zimbabwe, self-regulating building. There's a lot of bio-inspired software. In fact, every time you use an antivirus program, that's a biomimetic product inspired by epidemiology and what we know about how immune systems work. This one is really interesting in terms of energy, and I would suspect that if you're in business right now, you will probably be using something like this. It's one of the major things that's going to be in smart grids. It's a company called Regen. They've studied how honeybees and other social insects communicate with each other and quickly tell each other where recent food sources are. Forget about that food source, it's depleted. How they quickly communicate that information to each other and then move quickly. It's called swarm technology. What this does is it looks at the appliances in a building, and those appliances are constantly talking to each other using this swarm technology software. And they'll say, okay, it's peak power right now, why don't you shut down? I'm a refrigerator, I can't shut down, but you can shut down. You're a light. And it's a way to reduce your peak power loads in your building by quite a bit. In fact, British Telecom is routing your cell phones right now using swarm technology to find the least congested cell phone towers to go to. I really applaud the aspirational goals of going to zero. If we can reach zero, you know, things like, you know, when I read Unilever's aspirational goals, I can't believe we've finally gotten to this place. And yet, you know, we can't stop here. Imagine if this wetland only cleaned the water for itself, and you live downstream of it. We expect ourselves to meet our own needs without harm, but we don't yet expect ourselves to be generous. And I think that's the next, if you will indulge me, I think that's the next phase. When you look at, this is a project called Mannahatta, where they looked at what Manhattan was, the environmental history of Manhattan, and that's kind of how it looked. People lived there, but that's how it looked. What's interesting to me about this is that that complex adaptive system on the right, that forest, is giving all kinds of environmental benefits. It's cleaning air, it's cleaning water, it's cooling the air, it's nurturing biodiversity, it's building soil, ecosystem benefits that don't necessarily just accrue within its boundaries. It's generous. The system on the left is not. What would it take for the city to function, biomimicry is about function, as elegantly as that forest? It's not going to look like that, but I would suggest that it should function like that. It should function as well as that. A lot of energy there, a lot of intelligence there, an incredible amount of wealth there. Why can't we do as well as that forest in terms of ecosystem services, what they call ecosystem services? I think it's because we haven't challenged ourselves to. So ecological performance standards, we work with, my company, Biomimicry Guild, works with HOK, largest architecture and engineering firm in the world. And when we do cities, where we work with their city planning department, we challenge the cities to provide the same level of ecosystem services as the native ecosystem. We literally go in as ecologists, we come up with numbers. How many tons of water are stored in every rain event? How many millimeters of soil is built? How much water is purified each year? And that's what the city managers have to do. And it is a huge aspirational goal. I cannot tell you how much above it is than what we do. Aspirational goals are selection pressures. Innovation will happen if we, I think, if we task ourselves to be generous. That's the next step. We work with a lot of technologies, as you can see, but we also work with these things called life's principles, which are principles like life does chemistry in water. They're ubiquitous principles. They're what all carbon-based life forms on Earth do. And it's a very powerful, as a company, framework. We've been talking a lot about waste equals food, circular economies. There are a lot of other life's principles that we have yet to explore. So how can you get involved in your businesses? There's wonderful consulting firms here in Europe that are doing biomimicry, and I would just recommend that you get a biologist to your design table. And that means, and I think of design as policy as a design, any kind of decision making. You can ask how nature would do this. And I'll just close by showing you an incredible graphic by Adam Neiman. How many people have seen that graphic on the left? That is, on the left, that small ball is all the water, all the ice, all the salt water, fresh water, all water on Earth. Volume, compared to the volume of the Earth. That's it. And on the right is all air that we can breathe, compared to the volume of the Earth. Sweetening inside those two balls is what it is we're here to talk about. We get involved in the details, and we get involved in the numbers and the metrics and the ISO, and that's really what we're doing. And life's been doing that for a long time, sweetening this planet, so it's lush enough for us to live on. That's the most innovative technology I'm going to tell you about today. Life creates conditions conducive to life, so that an organism survives not just because its offspring survives. It's successful if its offspring 10,000 generations from now, 100,000 generations from now. That's what as a biologist, that's what success is. That your genetic material is around all those generations ahead. The only way to take care of that offspring is to take care of the place that's going to take care of that offspring. So when we get back to what it is we're really, really doing, it's continuity of life on Earth. It's creating conditions conducive to all life. And the best way to do that, really, is to set our sights really, really high. Creating conditions conducive to life. And then to remember, we're not the first species to have gone through this gauntlet and tried to figure it out. So invite a biologist to your design table and see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you. We just have time for a few questions from the audience. Does anyone have anything?
They will.
Well, let me ask you one, actually. Are companies actually beginning to pick up on biological scientists? I mean, are you seeing people getting to the design table, to the boardroom, and making that presence felt?
Absolutely, yeah. We work with people like GE and Procter & Gamble and Boeing and Nike and Levi's. It doesn't really matter what industry sector you're in. Everybody has to innovate right now. Everybody realizes that. I mean, all the talk about about green and about sustainability, and at the end of the day, there's a Monday morning in which you have to do something differently. And so the innovation labs are often tasked with it, and they've kind of run out of their own ideas. At this point, they're looking for really radical transformation. And when it's usually the companies we work with tend to be companies that have already explored most sustainability frameworks and are ready for that next step. They want something really dramatic. When we leave, they usually hire biologists on staff, is what happens. So I think, we're just in the early stages of seeing this. A biologist being at a design table will not be unusual after a while. It'll be, you don't think anything of kind of having an ergonomics person or a human factors person being at a design table. It sounds odd right now, but I think it's getting to be de rigueur in some innovation labs.
Anyone else? Right there in the table, second row.
Hi, my name's Guy Battle from Deloitte. Ginny, I was particularly interested in your notion that I think is correct, that zero is really just the starting point. Everyone thinks about zero as being like the finishing line, but we know that great athletes always look beyond that finishing line. And it's the first time, what sort of like clicked in my mind as you were talking, this notion that it's about giving back the generosity. And perhaps you just talk a little bit more just about how important it is to go beyond zero and think about that generosity and the giving back.
It literally is a switch in mindset. We were working in a city called Langfang in China. North China Plain hasn't had its native ecosystem there for 4,000 years. 4,000 years. It's really in bad shape. It's between Beijing and Tianjin. It takes all of the pollution from Beijing, right? 3 rivers run through the city, and they're a water-starved city. Why? Because they channelize the river and they let them go through because Beijing hasn't cleaned its water. Poor Tianjin gets it twice, right? This is an unsustainable thing, and I think that when we're getting to the point when Beijing figures out how to clean its water, Langfang is going to want that, and it's going to be that much more valuable. I mean, I think that there's a level of, you started as a concept and you say, we should be producing clean water for our neighbors. But that becomes a very valuable thing as well. I mean, I think there's actually profit to be made too from starting this process of, now I have clean water as something that I have produced. It's a service that now you can think about my city knows how to clean water. So I think people say, well, who's going to be altruistic enough to do that? Do you need regulation for that? I think it starts with people who have a change of heart enough that they actually want that to be an aspirational goal. But eventually, it turns into something that there's a whole set of, if you say to yourself, Beijing, I'm going to clean my water before it leaves, you suddenly create all of these innovations about cleaning water because you've tasked yourself to do that, right? And that becomes, again, something that you can export, that you're good at, that expertise. So I think there's this cascade, sort of virtuous cascade that happens as a result of setting yourself that generosity bar.
I know we are running over, so if there's one more question, or okay, we can wrap it up. Thank you very much, Janine, and thank you, Paul. Two great speeches.